dear learners. I once again welcome you to this MOOC on population and society. We are in week 8 and today in this video we shall be discussing the module 27 of this MOOC titled Rural to Urban Migration in India. Dear learners, as you all may remember, in the week module 5 of this MOOC course, we discussed about migration. We tried to understand what is migration, what are the different types of migration, so on and so forth. And in that module, we have learned that migration implies movement of a person from his usual place of residence to another place where he either settles permanently or temporarily. So, in simple words, migration implies the change of residence of a particular person, movement of a person from one place to another. Now, migration may be permanent or temporary. When a person moves away from his place of origin or place of birth to another place, to another location and settles there permanently, this is called permanent migration. On the contrary, some people migrate from their place of birth to another place for a particular period of time and then may come back to his place of origin later or to his place of birth later. This is called temporary migration. So, migration can be both permanent and temporary. Now, migration can also be of some other types. There are different types of migration. We all have discussed or we all have learned about these types in module 5, like immigration, outmigration, emigration, internal migration, external migration, so on and so forth. And in this module, that is module number 27, we shall be focusing on rural to urban migration in India. We shall be discussing in details about that type of migration which is about rural to urban areas, which is about people migrating from rural to urban areas. So the basic objectives of this module are to explain the term outmigration or rural to urban migration, to discuss about rural to urban migration in the context of India, to discuss the factors behind rural to urban migration, and lastly to discuss the socio-economic and other consequences of rural to urban migration in the Indian context. So without further delay, let us begin our discussion with the term outmigration. Let us try to understand what the term outmigration means. Dear learners, as you are aware, outmigration means moving out from the place of birth to another place or to another location within the same country. That means, or for example, a person moving from Assam to West Bengal would be an outmigrant for Assam. He will be an immigrant for West Bengal but will be an outmigrant from Assam because he has left his place of origin, that is Assam. So, outmigration simply means moving out or moving away from one's own original place of residence, place of birth, so on and so forth. It typically involves individuals, families moving from one location to another within the same country for a variety of socio-economic reasons. Dear learners, you must also be aware that migration is not a new or a modern day phenomenon. Its history goes back to the inception of human civilization itself. During the early part of human history, when infrastructure and transport communication systems were not very well developed, the rate of migration was low. But in the modern society, with the advancement of human civilization, with infrastructural development, with development of transport and commerce, The rate of migration has been increasing over the period of time, and it is increasing steadily. People are now moving from one place to another in search of livelihood, for employment, for education, and for a variety of other reasons, so on and so forth. So we shall discuss these reasons behind migration in a short while. Again, just as there are different reasons or factors behind migration, outmigration also has its own set of consequences. Its consequences are felt in the society, in the economy, polity, in the environment, so on and so forth. So there are innumerable consequences of outmigration or rural to urban outmigration, and we shall also discuss about these consequences later in this video. So dear learners, from this you must have understood that outmigration simply means movement of a person or a family or a group of persons from one location to another within the same country. And in the Indian context, outmigration is a significant phenomenon, especially in the rural areas. Census data states that even though urban to urban migration is also high, but rural to urban migration is increasing tremendously over the years. As per the Migration in India Report 2020-21, based on the Periodic Labour Force Survey, July 2020 to June 2021, published by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, Government of India, the percentage of rural to urban migration is 33.5% for males and 15.6% for females. While urban to urban migration for male is 27.6% and for female it is 13.2%. For the female population, the same report states that rural to rural migration is very high, that is 63.3%, and for male it is only 18%. Therefore, in case of male, we see the migration is more to inter-village or intra-district or inter-district. Okay, he moves out from the village to a different village or to urban centers. But for women, it is mostly from one village to another. Therefore, census report also states that for females, rural to rural migration is the percentage is higher, and this is, as different studies have suggested, this is mostly because of marriage. Woman being married to another village is bound to migrate from her place of residence to another village. So for her, even though it is mobility is within the rural areas, but it is from one village to another village. Again, in another study by D.P. Singh and R. Biradar, the patterns of intra-district, inter-district, interstate and international migration streams from 1991 to 2011 indicates that 21.8% of population is intra-district, 10.0% inter-district migrants, 4.7% as interstate migrants, and 0.44% as international migrants as per 2011. The study also states that the trend of rural to urban migration is increasing day by day, which is having a negative impact on the development of both agriculture as well as urbanization. Again, in an article by Ramanath Jha of Observer Research Foundation, states that in case of rural to urban migration, there were 9.3 million migrants between 1971 and 1981 as per the census data. Further, a total of 10.6 million migrants moved to cities between 1981 and 1991, and a total of 14.2 million people moved to urban areas between 1991 and 2001. These migrants made up 18.6%, 18.7% and 20.8% of all additions to cities and towns. So dear learners, From these different data or from these different studies, reports, we have seen that rural to urban migration is increasing in India. Even though urban to urban migration is also high, as we have previously mentioned, but rural to urban migration is also gaining momentum. Census data states that while Maharashtra, Delhi and West Bengal, these states are highest migrant attracting states due to their infrastructural developments, due to their employment avenues, due to their industrial, because they are industrially developed, so on and so forth. States like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh are the states where people out migrate. So while we have states like Maharashtra, Delhi, West Bengal who receives migrants from other states, on the other hand, states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, their large number of people moves out from these states to other states in the country. So now let us try to understand the factors behind outmigration or factors behind rural to urban migration. Dear learners, we all know and we have also learned about it in module 5 that migration is driven by different pull and push factors. The pull factors include abundance of employment avenues, livelihood avenues, better healthcare facilities, better educational avenues, political stability, availability of better resources, so on and so forth. And the push factors which compels people to move out of a particular area includes lack of employment avenues, lack of livelihood avenues, lack of lack of educational facilities, lack of health facilities, political instabilities and hostilities, natural disasters, displacements, so on and so forth. So there are multitude of factors which actually contribute to this movement of people from one region to another. And let us now discuss these factors in details. The first factor, which is one of the most important factors of rural outmigration or migration of people from rural to urban spaces, is economic opportunities. The urban areas provide ample economic opportunities to people in both formal and the informal sectors. Indian urban centers offers a wide range of employment options in industries such as manufacturing, construction, services and the informal sector. A huge section of the rural population today have moved to urban areas for employment and livelihood. Majority of them join the informal workforce in the urban areas, which includes street vending, domestic work, small-scale enterprises. In addition to formal sectors, informal job avenues, the growing informal sector also absorbs a huge chunk of population from the rural areas. Agricultural distress is one of the prime causes behind rural outmigration. Inadequate agricultural yield, then the toil involved, the hardships involved, then the dependence of agriculture on monsoons, so on and so forth, makes youths hesitant to take up agriculture as their livelihood. And as argued by one of the renowned social scientist Partha Chatterjee in his article Democracy and Economic Transformation in India, that in almost half of the states of India, more than 40% of the rural population is engaged in non-agricultural occupation and the number is rising rapidly. Rarely would a villager today want to become a farmer if given an opportunity somewhere else. This is what he states in his essay. Furthermore, a renowned social scientist Dipankar Gupta also states that the rural to urban migration in India is too pronounced to be overlooked. In his essay titled Withered Indian Village Culture and Agriculture in Rural India, he states that the ambition among the rural youths to leave the village for a better life outside it or to stay in the village but not work on land is too pronounced to be overlooked. The risks and the uncertainties associated with agriculture has turned a huge section of the youth skeptical about its viability as a livelihood option. And added to this is their exposure to the new economic setup where tertiary and the manufacturing sectors or the secondary sectors have is booming and have surpassed agriculture. The new avenues of livelihood that has been created by these secondary and tertiary sectors have attracted youths towards taking up such occupations and moving out of the villages in search of employment and livelihood. So, dear learners, better livelihood opportunities or employment opportunities in the urban areas is one of the important reasons behind rural outmigration. Another important reason behind rural outmigration or factor which determines rural outmigration is educational opportunities. Many villages, even today, or many rural areas, lack of schools, colleges, institutions of professional education, so on and so forth, which compels people to move out for higher education, for acquiring professional degrees. And this basic lack of educational facilities in rural areas is another strong factor which compels people to move out of rural areas and go to urban areas. The third strong determinant of rural to urban migration is development induced displacements. In many rural areas, which are abundant on land and natural resources, they attract a lot of investors who establish industries and factories in these areas. The state, in addition to the private investors, the state also invests on development projects, and these development projects are established in rural areas too. And this kind of development projects, either by the state or by industrialists, they acquire land from rural people. As a result, people in the rural areas, they suffer from land alienation and dispossession. And this kind of land alienation and dispossession compels people to move out from their areas, to move out from their regions to other areas in search of settlement. Multiple such examples in the Indian context, and scholars such as Amitabh Bhaviskar, Amit Bhadure, Walter Fernandez, B.B. Mohanty, Michael Levin, and so on and so forth have worked extensively on development-induced displacement, dispossession, and relocation of people from one area to another. So, such development-led land alienations, development-led dispossessions, displacements also lead to migration of people from rural areas, and in many cases they move out to urban centers in search of livelihood, in search of jobs, and therefore this is one of the important factors of rural to urban migration. Then again, natural disasters like flood, earthquake, so on and so forth also compels people to move out of their areas to another locations. Sometimes some areas are very prone to natural disasters. The environment is not conducive for settlement. In such cases, people move out of such areas. And again, a section of these people moving out of such areas go to urban places because urban spaces at least offers livelihood options, shelters, even though in underdeveloped areas, but nevertheless they move out to urban centers for a better livelihood or for a better living. Then political instability is another factor which results in rural outmigration. Sometimes some regions are prone to insurgency, conflicts, violence, and such politically hostile areas becomes unsuitable or unfavorable for human settlement. In such cases, individuals and even mostly groups of people actually relocate to new places. They move out from such areas and move into places which are more or less politically stable, where there is law and order situation, where which are not hostile, which are not violent, where there is no insurgency, which are safe, such. So people move from this politically hostile region to safer places. So that is another region for migration. Then, dear learners, the social and social factors, like as we have already discussed about lack of educational facilities, health infrastructures also compel people to move out from rural to urban areas, because urban areas provide better healthcare facilities, better access to health. So people move from remote rural areas where there are dearth of doctors, clinics, hospitals, to urban areas where there is better health facility. So lack of health facility in rural areas is also an important reason behind rural to urban migration in India. Apart from that, the growing urban spaces with its socio-economic facilities, transport and communication facilities, industries, so on and so forth, have attracted a huge chunk of population from the rural areas, and the transport and communication facilities have eased this process, because the transport and communication facilities have developed. Now people can easily access the urban areas, so this migration from rural to urban areas is increasing. So dear learners, we have learned about the different factors which contribute to rural to urban migration in India. Let us now discuss about the socio-economic and other consequences of rural to urban migration. Rural to urban outmigration has far-reaching consequences both for the urban society as well as for the rural society. We shall first discuss its consequences or bearing upon the urban society. The first consequence is the pressure of urbanization. Rapid rural to urban migration contributes to the swelling of urban populations, leading to increased pressure on urban infrastructure and services such as housing, transportation, water supply, sanitation, and healthcare. It leads to a strain on the public services. The influx of migrants strains urban infrastructure and public services, leading to issues such as overcrowded public transport, inadequate waste management, and overburdened healthcare and education systems. The second consequence is on employment. Migration from rural areas to cities is often driven by the search for better employment and employment opportunities. While this can lead to economic growth by supplying labor for urban industries and services, it also results negatively in ways such as increased competition for jobs, decreased wages because of abundance of labor supply, etc., especially in the informal sector, and potentially leading to urban unemployment or underemployment. Another important consequence of rural to urban outmigration is growth of urban poverty and slums. Owing to the rapid migration of people from rural to urban areas, as we have discussed, it has led to congested urban spaces. There is lack of proper shelter, proper housing, so on and so forth, and as a result, many migrants ends up living in slums and ghettos. So, These slums often they lack basic amenities and are prone to health hazards, contributing to urban poverty and social inequality. So, growth of urban poverty and slums is also a very, very negative consequence of the rapid rural outmigration or rapid urbanization that is taking place in our country. The next consequence is social exclusion and discrimination. Following from the above point that we have discussed, another consequence of rural outmigration or rural to urban migration is social exclusion and discrimination. Many migrants face discriminated behavior from in their new areas or in the new locations, and they are met with social exclusions, discrimination, so on and so forth. So this is another consequence of the migrants. The rural to urban migration also has an environmental impact. Urbanization resulting from rural to urban migration often leads to increased environmental degradation, including pollution, deforestation, and habitat loss as urban areas expand and demand for resources grows. So with the expansion of urban areas, there forests are being cut down, hills are being cut down. We see such kind of environmental degradations for construction of buildings, constructions of road, infrastructure development, other infrastructure development, so on and so forth. So rural to urban outmigration also has a negative consequence for the environment. So we have already discussed about the consequences in the urban areas. Let us now focus on the economic, socio-economic and other consequences of rural to urban migration in rural areas. The first consequence is population decline. Rural areas may experience a decline in population as younger individuals leave for better economic opportunities in urban centers. This can lead to demographic imbalances with an aging population left behind. The second impact in the rural areas is the impact in the economy. Rural outmigration leads to the departure of working age population, and this can weaken the local economy of the rural areas. With fewer people contributing to workforce, there may be a decline in agricultural productivity and local business may suffer due to reduced demand. The third impact is the loss of skills and talent. Rural outmigration can result in a brain drain with skilled and educated individuals leaving for urban areas. The loss of human capital can hinder innovation, entrepreneurship, and overall development of the rural communities. Then cultural shift or cultural changes is another impact of rural to urban migration in the rural areas. As younger generations, they leave the rural areas, this may lead to the change, or this may lead to changes in the cultural fabric of the rural communities. Traditional practices and values may decline as the younger generation leave for urban places, and the new urban culture that might influence them, and when they come home there is a transmission of urban culture to even the rural spaces. So such kind of a dynamic situation may lead to cultural changes in the rural areas. Dear learners, another very important or very significant impact of rural-urban migration or rural to urban migration is the impact on or the changes in the land use pattern. As population declines in the rural areas owing to rural outmigration, there may be changes in the land use patterns. There are many instances when abandoned farmlands are given on lease to other communities, given on lease to other people, or sometimes these lands they are lying fallow, there is no cultivation, and sometimes there is encroachment on such vacant lands, so on and so forth. So rural to urban outmigration may also have impact on the land use patterns, land ownerships, change in transfer of land ownerships, so on and so forth. Another impact of rural outmigration or rural to urban outmigration is its impact on social cohesion. Outmigration can impact social cohesion in the rural communities. Close-knit ties may weaken as families and friends scatter to different locations, potentially leading to feelings of isolation and loss of community spirit. Lastly, dear learners, another significant impact of rural to urban migration in the rural areas is the remittance. So remittance is basically the money sent by the migrant population to their families back home, to their families living in the rural areas. This remittance can help to eradicate a lot of economic problems in the families, to help elevate poverty, improve living standards in the rural areas. So the remittance can have a positive impact for the rural families and rural areas. But at the same time, it can also have a negative consequence, and that is, receiving remittance can make these families in the rural areas dependent solely upon the remittances, and as such, this might inhibit the local development, this might inhibit the rural development. They may solely depend on remittance for their livelihood, and as a result, this might perpetuate the cycle of migration rather than staying in their areas, staying in their place of origin, staying in their own rural areas and contributing to the local economy, contributing to the rural economy. This might rather, perpetuate migration. That is, more and more people, or more people from the younger generation will tend to move out and work outside and send remittance back home. So this remittance, it has both positive and negative consequences for rural families and rural economy. So with this, dear learners, we have come to the end of discussion of today's module, and in this module we have basically focused upon outmigration, where we are talking about rural to urban outmigration in India. What is rural to urban migration? What is its intensity in the Indian context? What are the factors determining rural to urban migration, and what are the consequences of such migration on the urban areas as well as in the rural areas? We hope you have understood what has been conveyed in this module. Thank you.